This episode is brought to you by Cane's Donuts, celebrating 65 years as the best donuts in Boston. Follow Cane's on Instagram at Cane's_donuts to see why donuts are love.
I'll never forget it. I was scared to death. I was like, my wife was making supper up on the second floor. I go walking out, and I see Whitey standing behind the car with his key in the lock.
In this episode, we're sitting down with a true son of Southie, Jay Hurley, former district president of the Ironworkers Council of New England. Jay talks about the neighborhood, the killers, the cowboys, and the congressman. Buckle up, boys. We're headed to Southie. This is the Old Dirty Boston podcast. There was a woman in here, and her ex-husband, who's passed away now, he grew up with a sister, same situation, had special needs, and his mother would tell him, take your sister with you and take care of her.
Right.
And so he had this, you can't say the word a burden, but it was like he had to do all the fights. He had to, when anybody said something, it was on him. And it kind of created the same sense of, he learned how to stand up for people.
That's my life story. You know, from the outside looking in, it seems like a burden. Looking back on it, you're sympathetic for your parents.
What's your ethnicity? Like, what are you?
Irish, yeah.
And your dad worked...
a Teamster. He was a Medford guy. Married. My mother was the Southie person. They lived in the house my grandfather built, my dad's father built. But they were from Medford. So my dad was in the Navy for 6 years during World War II. He did 6 years, and when he got released, got released out on the West Coast, and somehow he got hooked up with my Uncle Jerry, the guy who got me in the Ironworkers, and they somehow... Jerry and a guy named Timmer Murphy, and they made their way back to Boston, and my dad became friends with them, so he used to come to Southie to see Jerry and Timmer. So he showed up at my grandmother's house, knocked on the door. My mother answered. My mother was, Jerry's sister, answered the door, and she was like, "Oh, who's this handsome guy?" And next thing you know.
So you grew up in Southie.
Yep.
What street did you grow up on?
4th Street, 788 East 4th till I was 16. I was the guy that had to go home when all my friends were having their fun. The next day I'd go out and my friends would be telling me, here's what we did. We watched this. We watched this guy get beat up. We saw this. We saw that. And they'd be laughing and joking and raising hell. And I'd be like, I wish I saw this. I wish I saw this. We lived in the second floor at 929 East 4th. I had my own 12 by 12 bedroom with bay windows with water views. But the beauty of it is I had a little porch outside my bedroom. There was no door. So what I used to do was I'd go home. My mother's room was down the hall to the left. I'd come in the door. Her room was right where you come in the door, so she'd size you up as soon as you come through the door. Come over here. Let me look at you. And you'd be like, hey, Mom, what's up? I said, I'm in for the night. So I'd put the TV on. I'd stuff a bunch of pillows in. Out the window I'd go. Down my ironworking skills to use. Down I'd go. Slide down the column. That was the easy part, was getting out. I had it down to a science. It would take me like 1 second to get from my room back into my buddies would be parked up the street. I'd get back in the car. We'd take off. Now all of a sudden I was part of all the action. I was part of all the action from that point forward. But then at 2, 3 in the morning, you'd be half drunk and you'd have to get back in. Now I got to go climb up the column, grab the gutter, pull myself up the porch, in the window, and it was kind of comical. But I never got caught. Never, ever got caught.
You think they might have known and just let it go?
No. My mother was tough as nails. We were up the corner one night drinking beer, just raising hell. It was like in the fall. Wasn't that cold. And a guy drives by. So one of my buddies was throwing the little Michelob ponies. He was throwing the bottle
my dad used to drink.
Against a brick wall across the street. Because the girls we hung around with were sitting over on there's a Perkins post there. They were sitting on the stairs at a Perkins post. So he was hitting the wall, and it was ricocheting down in their hair, all the glass, and they'd all be laughing. So everyone thought it was funny. So every time we finished the bottle, we'd give this kid Tommy the bottle, he'd throw it. He was nuts, So he'd throw the bottle, it would shatter off the wall, and all the glass would spray in their hair. And we'd just start laughing, So a guy was driving by, and he stopped, and he started staring at us. So we were like, we were hormones raging through us. Right. We're like freaking 18 years old. And we're standing on the stairs like we thought we were the toughest people in the world. This older guy looks at us like, well, he hears the bottle break. He stops and stares at us. So we stare back, but we don't say a word. And it's like, it's a staring contest. Well, he's got to move. He starts moving the car. Tommy throws a bottle. It hits the Perkins post on the other side of his car and shatters. We've been doing the same thing all night. Goofy, something to do, just to raise a little hell. The guy stops the car, gets out and confronts us. So we were like, get back in the car. This ain't going to end well for you, buddy. Get back in the car. He's in the middle of the intersection of 0 and 4th Street. Get back in the car, buddy. Get back in the car. And he started threatening us and this and that. Next thing you know, we beat the guy up. So some of us beat the guy. Some guys beat the guy up. One of my buddies got this bright idea.
Did you get a shot in there?
No, actually, I was with my other buddy. He got the bright idea. He goes, I always wanted to do this. I goes, do what? He goes, drive a car into a brick wall. The guy's car was running. So I ain't going to say which one of my buddies it was. I goes, don't do that. Don't do that. Just take the keys on the guy. We'll take the keys and throw him down the sewer. And my buddy says, nope. He gets in the car. He backs the car up to drive it into the Perkins Post wall. And there was the old street poles. They were like a 1/2-inch wall pipe, and he backs it up and he hits the pole, and the pole bends over at like a 45-degree angle, and the car ends up, rear-wheel drive car ends up on the pole, and the wheels are spinning because it's up on the pole. The guy's car is impaled up on the pole like this, so he can't get it to move because it's not a front-wheel drive car or four-wheel drive. So the car's stuck there. So I'm like, yeah, I think you did a good job. I think he'll get the message. So the guy staggers over to the car. He's like, I'll be back. The guy was still threatening us after guys had beat him up. He was still threatening us. So we were laughing. So now the cops come, so we disappear. But our beer was still there, so we had it hidden away. So we come back to start drinking more beer, and we're all laughing. We think it's funny. We think that was a fun night. You know, you're that age, you love doing that stuff.
It's all about getting in trouble and pushing
laughing,
the envelope and doing crazy shit, talking about it. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So we're all congratulating each other. Car pulls up, probably 45 minutes later. We're all standing there, and all of a sudden we look, and it's Tom King. He rolls his window down. He goes, how you doing, fellas? We said, hey, Tom, how you doing, Tom? Now we're on our best behavior. Eddie Haskell. Hey, Tom, how you doing? He goes, good. Having a fun night? We were like, it's quiet. Everything's quiet, huh? What about the guy you just beat up? Well, the guy was looking for trouble. He goes, yeah. You know what the guy was looking for? We were like, no. We walked down, and now he's got us all as a captive audience. He goes, you know what the guy was looking for? I says, we all say, no, what? He goes, the guy was just looking for a gun to come back and shoot you. And he goes, that guy was my cellmate in some, whatever prison it was. He goes, he was my cellmate. So he came to see me.
Welcome to Southie.
Wanted a gun to come back and shoot you. He goes, so I said to him, what do you need a gun for? He goes, I just got hassled. He just got out of the can. He said, the guy is insane. He goes, and you're going to pick a fight with that guy? He says, if he hadn't come to me, you guys might be dead. He says, so we were like, oh man, we're sorry. We'll apologize, whatever it takes. And we're like, all of a sudden, we're like little kids, He goes, don't worry about it. I squared it away. He won't be back. He goes, but you got to be very careful who you pick on. You never know who you're picking on. He says, let me tell you something. You picked the wrong guy with him. He says, thank God he came to me. He goes, you guys better wake up. He says, you're not going to last long around here if you don't. We were like, oh, geez. They had a club at 43 O Street. And we were just like 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. They had this club, and we hung in there. All the guys would come over from Somerville. We didn't know the guys from Somerville from Adam.
The Winter Hill guys?
Yeah, they'd come over and drink with these guys. It was this beautiful club it was an after-hours club, and it was a sport. It was called the City Point Athletic Association. But they kept all the beer in coolers, like a Coke machine, and you'd put 50 cents in and get a beer. I think a drink was 75 cents. We got our life saved one night. It was snowing out. We went to get beer for later on that night. There was right over across next to the Boston Globe. There was Channel 56 Liquors, and they had cheap beer. So we went over to get a few cases because after hours you run out of beer.
Yep.
So we loaded. It was snowing out. We were driving down M Street. We got to M and East 6th, and we were heading down towards the beach. And a car went right through the stop sign, and we almost hit the car. So we went through we back then they didn't have the four-way stops, and a lot of the streets were two-way still. We were going down M Street. This car went through, coming up 6th, and we slid into the intersection and almost hit them. We hit the horn. I think Michael Knievy was driving. We hit the horn. We're all sitting there, and we're looking, and there's these older guys with scally caps on. Right away, our instinct is jump out of the car and beat them up for going to a stop sign. And we were just all like hooligans, And open the door. Let's go straighten these guys out. They went right through that stop sign. And Jimbo Curran saved our lives. He goes, whoa, don't open the door. Jimbo looks. It was Howie Winter driving the car or in the back seat, I forget. And Jimbo goes, "That's freaking Howie Winter." He goes, "Don't open that door." He goes, "Stay in the car and keep your mouth shut." So whoever was driving the car, if it was Howie or he was in the back seat, they're looking right at our headlights. It just started getting dark out. They ended up taking off. We just kind of sat in the car like hoping they didn't get out. It's Southie. It's politics are inbred.
So what was the city like back then?
Oh,
when you were growing up?
It was a whole different world. Like, it was all small businesses. Hayden's Bakery was right across the street from my house. Unbelievable bakery. Several doors down from that, right directly across the street from my house, was George's Variety Store. There was a store up the corner, Bongiano's. It was like a fruit store. So there wasn't a lot of big stores in Southie. It was all mom and pop businesses. There was butcher shops all over. Now that's all been replaced by there's still a lot of convenience stores in Southie, but...
Were there underground spots, like after-hour spots?
Yeah, allegedly there was some place down on Farragut Road, Castle Island Club or something. I never entered that place, but I heard about it when I was a kid. But there was the notorious place for us where we hung out was the 43 O Street, the Mullins Club. And that's where all the Mullins hung out. That was it's like dying and going to heaven. Those guys are just... Those guys were the funniest guys in the world. They taught you the ins and outs of life, and they were just tough guys and great guys to emulate. But they were just hard living, and basically they had no respect. Like they'd make a score. This is what they told me in later years: is they'd make a score, and then they'd party until the money was gone, and they'd go make another score.
Yeah.
And they'd party till the money was gone and go make another score.
And a score would be something like
robbing trucks,
armored heist,
robbing trucks, TVs, meat. Suits, canned goods.
Oh, what about Triple O's?
Triple O's was just a phenomenal place. They'd have bands.
Would you hang in there?
Oh yeah, I bartended there for a brief period.
Wow.
I was a horrible bartender. I couldn't stand it. I probably did 2 or 3 nights there, and I was like, I just want to be on the other side of the bar.
Right,
I don't want to be
drinking
doing this.
them.
I work all day, The Bayside Club. That was Bobo Conley's place. He was a cop at one time, and he's still there, and he still owns it. It's now called the Sea Point. Another great Southie bar. It's still old school. You go in there now. Bobo's still there. His son Tommy's still there, and it's just kind of a throwback in time.
Yeah,
that's
there's
why
only
I went
a handful
the night,
of those left.
The night my son was born in '83, he was born 11:36 at night, and I made last call down the Bayside. Ironworking, anything. I never drank during work, ever. Never drank during work.
Is it true in your contract you guys have like a 2-beer limit?
No, it's all.
Really?
Yeah, it was never in. I mean, a 2-beer limit would be good for the contractors. Our guys used to drink. I had a kid, Franny Reeve. He got shot on a picket line in 1982.
Who did he get shot by?
He got shot by a non-union company owner. He got shot, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since.
Did the owner go to jail?
For a brief period. It was a real bad scene. It was like a mob mentality. But anyway, Franny's nickname was Six Pack. And why they called him Six Pack is he could drink a 6-pack at a red light, and he could drink a 6-pack at lunch. He could drink a 6-pack without taking the beers off the ring. He'd just crack them open on the bottom. I don't know what he'd do. He'd pop the bottoms open.
Squeeze them right in.
And just drink all 6 beers.
So you and all your friends, you're good time guys, you hang out at the bars, you're having a good time. Some of them probably get a little wilder than others. When do you remember drugs kind of coming on the scene?
Drugs were always around. It's just what kind of drugs. When we were kids, it was mostly speed and marijuana.
How old were you guys when you started drinking?
I was 13.
And kids start smoking pot around the same time?
Yeah, I never smoked. I never smoked because in the long run, I tried it a couple of times, hated it.
What did it make you feel like?
I just hated it. I hated it. I did it one time at lunch at Southie High. And we went down to a sub shop, and I remember leaning against a pole, and my head was itchy, and I ordered my sub, and I'm like my head was itchy, so I was trying to pull my hand up to scratch my head, but my hand was in my pocket. I was wondering. I looked down at my hand, and I was like, I don't ever remember smoking pot after that. I was like, that was not my bag.
And then were there pills and stuff around then?
A lot of speed, a lot of green hearts, a lot of black beauties.
Black beauties I hear a lot about,
Black beauties, and then there was, I forget, the other ones were these powder blue and yellow. I forget what they were called, bombers, I think.
And that was speed?
It was speed, yeah. So it was just speed. They were like heavy. That was kind of the drug of choice with those guys.
And what would they be like when they were on that?
Just same as cocaine.
Wired,
except it was a much worse. They'd crash much harder. When you were around those guys when they were the next morning, you better not cross them.
Yeah.
But the coke was.
Did that kick things into high gear? People got a little more brazen,
kicked into high gear. But I mean, it was so expensive. It was like, it's just, I don't know. I mean, like I say, I went from being a kid who had strict strict upbringing. All of a sudden, now I'm married. So I was married for about 3 or 4 years. Then I had my own kids. So for me, I mean, I had to be home. The one thing I was always great at was getting up in the morning. I was always good at getting up in the morning and going to work. The Mafia in this area, we were talking even earlier when we come in, you asked me if I knew a guy who was Italian. I said, I don't know many Italian guys that are mob guys, but I knew, I literally, like we're sitting here right now, I was groomed under the Tom Kings, Pat Nee's still alive. Jimmy Lydon was one of my best friends. Jimmy Manville was an iron worker. Mickey Dwyer's the guy who got his nose bit off. Your dad and I worked for those guys for years. They used to take care of us all the time. These were all guys I grew up around. It was just so many of them. Whitey was kind of on the periphery, but it was Tommy King was like when we were kids, he was like this guy that Paulie McGonigal lived on the third floor of my house. His family lived next door to us on 7880s Fort. They lived at so I knew the whole McGonigal family. It was like Danny died. I think one brother, Buddy, just died recently. I didn't know Buddy, but I knew Danny. I knew Paulie. I still see Paulie's son from now on. He lives down in the D.C. area. My son got married down in Maryland. Paulie came to the wedding. I used to babysit Paulie's kids on the third floor of our house. It was like I knew them all. So I just knew these guys. They were like my uncles or like my cousins. They were like best of friends to us, and they groomed my friends, all of my friends and myself, and just groomed us. And they used to see us as we were going to take their place when they kind of, when they got older. But we were inclined to do different things, and things, they were dropping like flies. I mean, Tom King got killed, Paulie got killed. Everyone says, oh, you see all these guys. If that Whitey was around now, I go, man, this guy stood on the street corner for friggin' 20 years. No one ever said a word to him, ever.
Right.
No one ever said a word, and I was there. And I'm going to tell you, the other thing they say, he never did anything to help the neighborhoods. I had a guy selling heroin in the other half of my house. Cops came twice, beat down all the doors, couldn't find the drugs, couldn't arrest him. So cops came once, went to some people I knew in the cops. They came, they did a raid. They did it second time, nothing. Guy's still selling. So I went and saw Kevin. I goes, hey, he said, what's up? And I said, I got a problem. He goes, that friggin' scumbags, that's so-and-so. He says, don't worry about it. He goes, I said, I'm going on the Cape for the weekend with Patty. I said, with the kids. And he goes, yeah, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. He goes, we move them about every 6 months. He goes, they set up somewhere else. He goes, 6 months from now, we'll be moving them out of another apartment. So the cops had gone in twice over the course of a month. Nothing. They were on my front stairs with guns drawn. And scared the heart out of me. So my son was about 4 or 5 years old, so it was probably 88. I went away to the Cape. When I come home, the place was empty. The guy was gone. So I called Kevin. He come up my house. He's still my neighbor now. He come up my house, and I says, he was an usher in my wedding. I was an usher in his wedding. And I says, what the hell did you guys do? Cops couldn't get rid of him. And he goes, well, Jimmy told him, he says, you got 48 hours to move. If you're here 49 hours from now, you're dead. So if I were you, I'd move. And there was 2 brothers, and they were gone. They were gone. Both ended up dying.
Do you think that they taxed them?
Oh, absolutely. No doubt in my mind. But that wasn't the problem. Again, I saw the other side.
I hear this.
What I'm saying is, so Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Riley would say go to Whitey Bulger and say, it was always Jimmy Bulger, but she'd say, Jim, they're selling drugs to my kid. And
what do you mean it was Jimmy?
Whitey was, if you talked to him, you didn't call him Whitey. His name was Jimmy, yeah. And nobody called him Whitey I was everyone called him.
So it would be rude if somebody said, hey, Whitey, they wouldn't.
No, that was what he was known as. But that was a nickname when he was a kid. He had blonde hair and stuff. His story's incredibly, he was going through the Midwest. He was quite a character. But
in your mind,
he was profiting off the drugs, no doubt in my mind. All I'm saying is, though, he did do a lot of stuff within the neighborhood to satiate a lot of fears. And if legitimate law-abiding people had a problem and they knew him or they knew any of his associates, they'd straighten the problem out in 2 seconds. You didn't have to go through court. You didn't have to go through nothing.
Yeah.
He'd come down and he'd say, a few times we got rousted by him.
So you grew up in a Southie that's really made Boston famous in a lot of ways because there's been so much written, there's the movies, there's the whole thing around Whitey. But it was a bigger thing than that. It wasn't just Whitey. It was kind of this Irish Catholic enclave in Boston, and there was an element of, criminals or criminality.
Oh,
What did that landscape look like? Who was in there? Who was...
Criminals were everywhere. What was also everywhere, my wife and I argue this point all the time. My wife always says to me, this world is getting crazy. I said, this world is totally calmed down now. I said, you kidding me? I says, when I was a kid, all you ever saw was guys beating their wives up, guys getting in fights in bar rooms. I said, you don't see that stuff anymore with all the cameras and stuff. You just don't see that. The world we grew up in the 60s and the 70s, that was violent times. That
Wild
was crazy
West, yeah.
times. It was crazy times.
Guys were literally getting shot in the streets.
Yeah, guys were getting shot. I mean, everyone had guns. It was nuts. I mean, not us. We were too young, but it was like, I'm reading The Godfather I read it once a year, every year. It's kind of so interesting. It was written in the 60s, and in the 60s was all the stuff that you hear about in Boston.
Yep.
There's a big meeting, and you've seen the movie, so the big meeting when all the Dons sit down.
Yep.
All the bosses. In the book, it's much more elaborate, and the book is 10 times better than the movie. So I read it once a year just to refresh my memory, and the book gets into Luca Brasi a lot more, gets into Johnny Fontaine a lot more. But they talk about the mob, Cleveland, L.A., 5 families in New York, and Don Corleone naturally is the smartest of them all. But then they talk about the guy from Boston, and they say he's no good. He's just no good. The leader of his name in the book is Dominic Panza, P-A-N-Z-A. They say he's no good. People are dropping like flies in Boston. He has no control over all these renegade gangs. Well, that was the Winter Hill Gang. That was the Charlestown gangs, the Southie gangs.
Who were the gangs or the crews in Southie?
Oh, basically, when it comes to gangs, everyone will tell you they had a gang. Everything was street corner denomination. Like what street corner do you hang at? Everyone knew where to find you. Where's he hang? H and 5th. Where's he hang? K and 7th. Where do they hang? O and 4th. Where do they hang? D and 3rd. D and 5th. D and 7th.
So the Mullins gang ran Southie.
Oh, yeah. The Colleens ran Southie. Then the
Colleens and the Mullins are separate?
Yeah. Colleens were the Colleens. They were down Broadway Station. The Mullins were more City Point oriented.
Okay.
So the Mullins were like up around City Point. But then somehow Whitey, the way I get the story, this is just this conjecture. What I was told was the Mullins were the fiercest fighters, but the Colleens were like a lot smarter with their money and things like that. They knew how to get things done, but the Mullins were just fierce fighters, but they weren't like business oriented. Everything was make a score, have fun. Make a score, have fun. It wasn't a business to them as much as it was a way to keep money in their play. Yeah, we're like cowboys, exactly. So,
would you hear the rumors about Whitey as he was coming up?
Yeah.
And I think it's important. You say that people, to his face, would not call him Whitey.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm not saying they wouldn't call him Whitey, but people would correct him. Say, don't call, if I saw Weeksy, we'd say, hey, what did Whitey say? And he'd say, oh, Whitey, Jimmy. Jimmy said, and he'd correct us. So we'd do, it was just, that's how he was known. But
was it more like talk about him and less actually him around?
He was like kind of.
Was he flaunting around Southie like I'm the king shit now?
He was very low key, very tactical. He'd look at you. He could kill you with a stare. He'd just look at you, just stare right through you. You could feel him putting a laser in your head.
Yeah. He
showed up at my house one day because I was big into the political stuff with the union and stuff.
Yeah.
So he showed up at my house one day. Well, prior to that, I had a buddy that was cutting up too much in the bars. And so I got a message from them.
Cutting up, you mean fighting or just?
Fighting and stuff, getting in trouble, raising hell. So I got a message because, I was kind of, I was kind of little more level-headed. They said, hey, you better talk to so-and-so. You better talk to so-and-so. They're not happy with him. So I'd pull them aside and say, listen, and, they were crazy kids, and they'd say, F him. So what? I don't care. I'd say, well, you better care because they got their eye out for you now.
Yeah.
And so he said, but he said something to me. He said something to me that always stuck with me. He said, I want to tell you something. He goes, if you don't knock it off, it's going to end up in the trunk of a car. And I was like, oh, I get it. I hear you. We'll get the message to him. Yep. And so I live in a dead-end street, like I told you. And I'm sitting in my house after work. I was still working out in the field. And he pulled down the street. And Weeksy came to my door, and Weeksy says, hey.
Whitey pulled down the street.
Yeah.
Yep.
Weeksy was with him. So he comes to my door. He says, hey, buddy, what's up? Come on in. He goes, Jimmy wants to talk to you out here. I'll never forget it. I was scared to death. I was like, my wife was making supper up on the second floor. I go walking out, and I see Whitey standing behind the car with his key in the lock. I'm saying, they took care of that guy. He's in the trunk. He says, come here. I walk over, and I'm like, I hope he's still alive. I'm like, and he pops the trunk open. The trunk comes up, and I don't see a body. I don't see anything. I see a box. I see a bunch of bumper stickers, but I can't even read them. My head's spinning. And the stickers said, Howie Carr, Bill Weld, Wasps, Union Haters. No union bug on them. You never put a sticker out if it didn't have a union bug on them. There was no union bug on them. So Whitey looks at me and he goes, I heard, this is during I'll tell you what year this was. It was the Question 2 campaign. So that must have been what? Oh, Christ. I'm trying to think now. 1988. It was 88 because we were running the Question 2 campaign. So I had all of Southie and a little piece of Dorchester. I had 10 precincts and wards and precincts. I had 2 wards and 10 precincts.
And do you feel like Whitey respected your ambition?
Yes. So he said to me, Weeks, he said, who do I give these to get rid of him? And he said, give him to Jay. He's involved with everything. So I'm just surmising. So Weeksy came to my door, got me off guard. I goes, come on in, because it's like friend to friend. I goes, come on in. And he goes, no, I can't. He goes, Jimmy wants to talk to you. I'm like, oh, okay. So I come down the stairs. I goes, hey, what's up? And he goes, how you doing? So he pops the trunk open. I'm expecting to see one of our friends in the trunk. I said, I hope they're just giving him a scare.
Yeah.
So when the trunk comes up, I'm looking for my buddy, and he's not in there, and there's a box with bumper stickers that said, Bill Weld, Howie Carr, Wasps, White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, Union Hater. And that's all it said.
Like, there was a guy, Michael Crimin, that grew up in Somerville, friends with my dad, and he had moved out to California because he owed a bunch of money. He owed like $30,000 to a bookie. And the bookie said, look, we're going to break your legs or we're going to kill you if you don't pay us. So he goes to California. He started working for a cable company. Yeah. So now he's going to get married. He has this plan. He's going to invite everybody from the company to the wedding, small cable company. Yep. His buddy that he was friends with, this guy Roy, was a professional thief. So while everybody from the company's at the wedding, Roy goes and rips them off, steals all their equipment. The next day, they're out of town. They got a U-Haul with all the shit in the back.
That's how the Mullins were. We were a different generation, and we were like, I'm going to Hawaii. And they go, Hawaii? We were lucky if we could make Cape Cod. The day I come back from Hawaii, Paulie McGonigal, he ended up dead with Tom King, probably a year later. He picked me up in Southie. He was riding me around. I was looking for my buddies. And he goes, where you been? He goes, where'd you get all the color? And I said, I was in Hawaii. It was only May. He goes, Hawaii? He goes, Jesus. He goes, you kids are unbelievable. I goes, yeah, how was it? Awesome. Now right away he wants to know, how'd you do? What did this? And it starts, and I'm like, what I found out later, Leiden would tell me, he says, you know why you're in the car? He says, yeah, he was giving me a ride. I was looking for my friends. He goes, they won't shoot you if they got someone in the car. Wow. He says, so he's riding around Southie looking for people, and he got you in the car, a young 18-year-old kid, he goes, and he's riding around, and you're his guard.
Yeah, you're his shield.
They're not going to shoot. They're not going to, with an innocent kid in the car, he goes, they're 15 years old, they're not going to shoot him. They'll think it's his son.
What did Tom King get killed over? Do you know?
Same thing. The legend has it, allegedly, he had a physical confrontation with Whitey in a bar in front of people. It's easily believable because Whitey was renowned for a lot of things, but he wasn't. He was a insanely smart guy. But Tom King was just a street guy, and allegedly Tom gave him a smack or pushed him or whatever. They had a physical confrontation somewhere. If you watch the movie, it just shows Tom King getting upset, and they end up taking Tom out. They went to do a job allegedly, and Whitey had in the movie, Whitey had the guns in a bag, and he gave Tom one. The firing pin was screwed up on or something, so Tom's didn't work. They went somewhere, boom, shot him. It was a whole different mindset. We admired them guys, but we saw where it takes you too, and they were like,
Yeah, and you wanted to go to Hawaii and have a real life. You didn't want to be
we saw a different
chasing
world.
every scam.
Yeah, and it was like, but work, we got good jobs. We all had good jobs. We were, my buddies were pipe fitters and cops, and I was an iron worker, and everyone had good jobs, working for the city or working for the T or whatever the case may be. Everyone had a good job.
Yeah.
So we'd say, what am I going to do? Blow the job, man? It's like, I'm married now. Basically, I was just getting into the ironwork aspect of it. So I went from hanging around in South Boston, all of a sudden working on high rise in downtown Boston with a bunch of crazy guys, and they were your basic Archie Bunker characters. They were old school, and
was there a lot of camaraderie with the Ironworkers?
Oh, it was amazing. It was the greatest group of guys I've ever met.
Did you feel like top of the world? Were you shitting bricks the first week?
No. They break you into it. These guys are the toughest guys you ever met. They do that kind of work, and they did it in the days where there were no rules. You had to sacrifice your body.
Yeah.
And these guys were so tough with us. That's why there's so few pictures of us. Guys, like I'm sure your dad don't have a lot of pictures. If you pulled the camera out to stop and have somebody take a picture, you get run off the job in 2 seconds.
Right.
These guys walked around. A lot of Newfoundlanders and people from Newfoundland. They called them the Newfies, and a lot of people from Nova Scotia in there. Well, my grandfather was from Newfoundland. And they called them in the ironworker terms, they called them goofy Newfies. But these guys were the ironworkers. They ran all the work, but they carried their blueprints around in their pocket. Like nowadays, if you're on a job, your blueprints are on a table. Anyone can walk over if there's a piece missing and look at the blueprint. In those days, they'd keep the blueprint in their pocket, folded up, so nobody could take their job. And if you wanted to find something out, they'd pull the blueprint out and look at it so you couldn't see it. And they'd say, yeah, get this beam number. Go find that and send that up. It was a whole different world. And these guys were so hard. They didn't like long hair. They didn't like beards. They didn't like drugs. I was never, the drugs for me, the marijuana use was off the charts. I never.
With the Ironworkers?
Oh, it was off the charts. I mean, they smoked it, right? It was like cigarettes. And guys just smoked and I hated pot.
Well, my dad said when he was apprentice, his coffee runs in the morning would be six packs of nips and
nips were huge. I was heading to Quincy Square one night. I used to go to the bar with these guys afterwards, and I'd take a bus to Quincy Square, a train to Broadway, and then a bus home. And Frank says, "Where you going?" I was outside, and he was getting in his car. I said, "You going near Quincy Center?" He says, "Jump in." Funniest guy I ever met. I mean, he was a crazy guy. So we're driving, and every time Frank stepped in the brakes heading to Quincy Center from the shipyard, all the nip bottles and all the beer bottles would roll off from under the seat. And then when he stepped on the gas, they'd all roll back under the seat. And it was the funniest thing. I kept thinking, the bottle's going to go under the brake, and we're not going to be able to stop the car. Right. I say, you want me to grab them, Frank? And he said, don't worry about it, kid. Don't worry about it. And he was just laughing, and that's how everybody was. The whole crew of guys. I look back on them now. I wish they had stuff like this back then.
You ever thought about doing an Ironworkers podcast?
Yeah, it's just too late for me. It's just, I know it's never too late, but I've always prided myself on listening to the old timers, keeping the stories in my head.
Yeah.
Paying the stories forward to other members and telling them stories, and now that's coming to an end, and I really don't know,
Well, this is a way to, reason I started this podcast is I grew up in Somerville, third generation, and the city has changed so much, and it's really for the last 100 years, it was the same demographic of people. It was working class, blue-collar families with kids. There was a dynamic. There was always a little rough and some drugs and some violence, but it was the same group of people.
Yeah, it's like Southie. It's just like Southie.
It's swapping out, same exact thing, and the way people speak, the way the people see the world, their morals, their values have all completely changed. I'm not saying everything's good about the old days, but I want to record that and make sure that people remember
where they came from. Yeah.
It's almost like cataloging history. So I think for the history of the union over the years, it wouldn't be you could start this, but it could continue on. And as things happen, as cities develop, I'm sure unions are going to get into tighter and tighter spaces. It's important, I think, to...
I couldn't agree more. My education came from working with working with young kids trying to get in the apprenticeship. From
Yeah.
going to be an apprentice with your dad and 40 other guys, just guys back then, no women, and learning like, hands-on by being an apprentice. But then in later years, I was the chairman of the JAC, the Joint Apprentice Committee, and I'd be picking the apprentices. So you'd be picking and choosing. Now you get a little more choosy. You learn every trick in the book. You got the guys come in with the fake notes. I was at the hospital, and it says patient's name, Patience, patience. Like, you got to have patience. I says, you sure you want to go with this excuse? And the kid says, why, what's the matter? I says, well, that's not how you spell patience. It says patience.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have patience? He wrote patience name. And they must have spell checked it for him, because I don't think he could spell patience either. I said, you sure you want to go with the story? Because you're lying. We know you're lying, but if you lie, we're going to throw you out. And he goes, that story's a lie. I said, okay. The most prideful thing you can do, walk in a room and say, I represent the Ironworkers, people just go, whoa. Because they see our members every day. They're up there putting the cranes up. They're up there humping rebar, carrying rebar, hot days, cold days, rainy days, snowy days. These guys are up there killing themselves. If it's 10 below zero, you get the same money as if it's 50 degrees out. And these guys kill themselves, and women, and they kill themselves. Yeah. But in many respects, it's a lot easier now because of safety. It's a lot easier now. Like I say, it's got progressively better. The guys that broke us in, your dad and I and all the people that came after us, the guys that broke us in, they didn't. I mean,
the first night he met Joe LaRusso, my dad goes to meet him. I think they lived in Waltham at the time. It's him and a buddy of his from Somerville. And they're like a karate group. That was their thing. Yeah. They all did karate, so they all hung together. Meets them in the apartment. They all take acid, right? And there's like an old town day in Waltham Center. So then they go out in the center, and now they're all going out trying to pick fights with people. He said they're grabbing girls' asses, knocking guys' glasses off. So a fight breaks out, and my dad panics. He's on the acid. He grabs the first guy he can and just puts him in a headlock and gets on the ground with him, right?
Yeah.
When the whole thing ends up, the guy that he grabbed was one of the karate guys.
Oh, yeah. Greyhound bus strike. So I sent you a bunch of photos. Those are the black and white ones.
Yep.
I was there, and there was an ironworker from Southie, real close friend of mine, and his brother, who I just knew peripherally, his brother was a Boston cop. He come over to arrest me at the Greyhound thing, and I just looked at him. I says, hey, I know you. I says, when I see you in Southie, I'm going to give you and I'm threatening the cop who's in uniform. So about 6 of them grabbed me and started wailing on me. So I was a big, strong guy, and I started walking down the street, and I'm like, everyone was cheering. It was going nuts, and I'm just walking down the street, and I wouldn't let them take me down, and they were whacking me and kicking me and punching me, and I had myself all covered up, and I just kept marching forward, and they couldn't get me down on the ground. All of a sudden, one of them has the foresight to grab me like a football player around the ankles, and I feel myself going. So when I start falling, they let me go, and I crash face first into the sidewalk. Oof. Then they just smacked me around, threw the cuffs on me, and threw me in the... So I'm laying there, and I'm like, that was pretty smart. I says, they were never going to take me down, upper body. I says, but that was really smart of that cop, whoever thought of tackling me. So I can still feel the arms around my ankles. So I turn and I look down, and there's a scally cap. And I go, it wasn't a cop. I said, was it a plainclothes cop? And I'm looking at my feet, and all of a sudden his head pops up. It's Stevie Lynch. And I'm like, what'd you do that for? And he goes, I didn't want you to get in them throwing you in the wagon. I go, yeah, but I was doing good. So they whacked me around, they threw me in the wagon, then they beat the snot out of him, threw him in the wagon. So he must have known he had a political career in the horizon, because we're sitting in there, we're all beat up, we're laughing, and they left the door ajar so they could toss more guys in. So he goes, watch this. And it was like Braveheart. He just burst through the door, and he yells out, freedom! And they wheeled the crap out of him, put him back in the wagon. I goes, that was brilliant, Steve. Wow. Beautiful. We ended up locked up in a cell over in Station 4, and it was comical. It was comical. So many times. And
how many free drinks you get out of that one?
Oh, a lot. I mean,
everybody in the local must have.
Well, my wife, because I was working and I was skipping work to go to a rally, and my wife said to me, "You're not going back there today, are you?" I said, "Yeah, I am." She goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I says, "Nothing." I says, "We got to keep doing this. And she goes, well, don't call me if you get arrested. I said, okay. So we went the second day. We got arrested again. They beat the snot out of us again. They throw us back in there again. And then we end up getting bailed out. And, we went through the bail bonds when we get out, and now we go drinking. So I don't go home. I don't go home till about like 3, 4 in the morning. I go home, hammered. And my wife says, where were you? I says, I got arrested. I just got out of jail. She says, why didn't you call me? I said, you told me not to. So she never made that mistake again. I said, you told me not to call you if I got arrested. I says, I didn't call you. I didn't bother you. And it was, she was just starting to have, it was around, I forget when that was, but right around the time we started having kids. So, yeah, she was, my wife was like without my wife, I don't know how I would have never made it.
Well, and for me, when I went to look at those photos at the Union Hall in Southie, I expected to see all job sites, all workers, all that. It was 80+% families.
Yeah.
It was about the events that you guys had. It was about members with their families, members with their friends, their wives, their children. What people need to understand, I'm not a very political person, but when people throw in the politics of unions and this and that, I said, it's not about all of that. It's about the families. These are working men, and all they want to be able to do is do their 40 hours, work hard, and give their family a decent life.
Right.
Send their kid to college. Yeah. And that's what honestly makes America different than any other place.
We get painted so unfairly, but
when you talk about drugs, same thing. I grew up with a lot of kids. The opiate epidemic hit when I was like in high school, so it just took off. I got lucky that I tried them. They had the pills. I mean, we thought they were prescription medicine. How bad can this be? Yeah. So we all tried them. Yeah. Didn't do anything for me. I started working when I was like 15, 16 years old. So I had to get up and go to work the next day. I didn't like that feeling of being all numb and whatever. But it took a lot of kids, killed a lot of kids. A lot of them just never had anything that was worth stopping for. Like, what were they going to do? Get sober and work at the gas station? That wasn't. And for you actually gave them a chance to have a life. Nice. Listen, if you can kick the drugs, you can have a job that will support your family, that you can raise your children with, that you can have a living wage, a decent place to live. I mean,
everyone was like, you are brutal. How many chances are you going to give these kids? I go, as many as it takes. Many as it takes. And I have more success stories I could tell you, privately. Kids who are full out, blown out on heroin and things like that. Now they're out there making a ton of money, working on all the big jobs, putting cranes up, and they're loving it, And their whole life is different now, and they're not getting high. And I mean, the success story is just, that's what motivates me. So I knew all this. I work with all these kids. I was one of these kids. Then I work with all of these kids. But then in '93, I became the business agent. All of a sudden, now I get a car. I get a steady paycheck. It's as much as the guys in the team make.
Yep.
And it's all mental work now, and it's all like you think it's a better job, but in the long run, you learn it's mental fatigue is 10 times worse than physical fatigue because you can sleep that off. When you're mentally fatigued, you don't sleep right, and it destroys your life.
Yeah.
And I went from pedaling bikes cross country and running marathons to being a fat guy but representing workers and learning a whole different vocation, which is what it is. It's a 7-day-a-week job, 24/7. No matter when people are working, they're going to call you. They call you on weekends. So for me, it just became like an addiction, and I loved it. But when I got the job originally, because we had one vehicle, we had one car, I says, now we have 2 cars. They pay for one. They pay the insurance. They pay the maintenance. They pay the gas. I says, I get to travel. I says, now do you see why I didn't want to go on the tee? And she's like, well, I was there for 1 year, and then I had to run for re-election because I came mid-term, 2/3 of the way through a term. So I got on it. I was president, so I was appointed as the BA when the BA left to take another job within the union. So I became the BA. But a year later, I had to run for the job again. So it was 5 guys running for 3 jobs. I was so young.
Yep.
I ended up winning. I ended up winning that race. It was and getting.
Was it scary for you, like early in your family, kind of money and because I have a sense maybe how you grew up, and I know for me it was a little like as I got further in my career, and I climbed the ladder, it's like you look down, the higher you go, the further you would fall.
Yeah.
And so it gets kind of...
It's a great analogy for us because the higher you go, the further you will fall, literally.
Yeah.
But, stop and think about it. Now I got a car and I iron out all the union problems and everything I learned for 20 years on the job and everything I learned for 18 years prior to that in Southie, growing up in Southie. Now I'm able to put all that stuff to work. So I was a streetwise kid with 20 years of ironworking experience, and I was young. I always kept my ego in check, and I always knew that my success was predicated on what the guys I work with, whether they succeeded or not. So we had great relationships, and I think your dad will tell you the union changed a lot from 93 on. We changed the mindset of the whole union. So, we were over in a little small building in Austin. We ended up buying a big, huge building in Southie. We did it all over.
That's where I got some of the photos from, actually.
We did the building all over. And
did you love it?
I absolutely loved it. I ate, drank, slept it. That's all I basically did. And but every day I try to improve it.
In the world of construction, like the big dig, let's say, you read all about all this graph and this and this.
Nothing to it. Like I say,
the Russian mob, that whole thing.
Nothing.
None of those companies were getting contracts.
I grew up in Southie. And I grew up around literally with all the Mullins from the Mullen gang.
What's the layout of construction? So there are independent construction firms and companies. Those are the guys that will purchase the properties, pay for the development, hire whoever works.
Yeah, it's basically what happens is, like, my son works for a real estate development company called HYM. So they're the company, they own Suffolk Downs. They're over at Government Center at the garage right now. They're tearing down the garage and building high-rise buildings there. So like, that's a classic example. HYM is the developer. So HYM gets their funding from third parties. How they get their funding is their business.
Third parties would be something like a
banks,
bank or
pension funds, things like that.
And the banks make money from the interest they get paid on the loans.
So banks are just in the business to make money. So they loan the money to HYM. HYM hires a general contractor.
Got it.
The general contractor then has to hire all the subs and handle all that. To me, it's incumbent upon me as a representative for 3,300 members. It's incumbent upon me to become a thorn in an owner's side.
And what was your reputation? Are you?
Oh, I like to think. I mean, my reputation was.
I wouldn't really want to have to be across from you.
But my reputation was one of being pretty fierce, but fair. I was always fair, and I always understood that we have mechanisms to make ourselves more competitive.
Is it better to be loved or feared?
Neither. I mean, naturally, everyone loves to be loved, but no contractor. Here's a classic example: a liquor wholesaler, big name. If I said the name, you know it. I drove the guy nuts. I drove the guy crazy. It was a family business in this area, and I drove the guy insane. He was building an 80,000 square foot building in Norwood, and I drove him insane. And his drivers were Teamsters, and I said to him, I said, look. He goes, you know what? So in the end, when we sealed the deal and we got the job, it was a little job. It was a small job.
But it sets precedent.
It's 6 to 8 weeks work for a dozen guys.
Yep.
But 6 to 8 weeks work for a dozen guys is a good deal. So this guy says to me, we're walking out of the trailer, and he looked at me and he goes, you know what? He was a great guy. And he didn't know me from Adam when it all started. I introduced myself to them. I give out vouchers in front of their liquor stores, 50% off. When the people get to the counter, they go, well, I have this voucher. They go, I just steal their trademark, and I'd make up my own vouchers. And at the very bottom, I had the fine print. We have a problem with this company. They're getting 50% off their labor, and they should be doing that. So we would give 50% off on their booze.
Yeah.
Because they were getting a 50%. Drive them nuts. Same with furniture companies. So this one particular guy, though, this was the lesson I learned.
And this is all the spirit of Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to fight for the work.
You have to fight. Every job is a boxing ring. And everyone would, like you say, like I had one contractor that like hated me. So there's 200 contractors, subcontractors in the steel industry that we deal with. And when I was trying to get a new contractor to sign, I had the list with me. I say, here's my contractor list, master list. There's all their names, all their phone numbers. I says, call anybody on the list and ask them if I'm good to deal with. I said, my word is my bond. I'll never screw you. If we can't make it work, it is what it is, and we'll get past it. And I just want to work with you. I want the opportunity. If you give me the opportunity, you'll never second guess yourself. So that worked all the time. But I'd say, here's the list. Go down the list. You're in this particular end of the business, so you want to call the guys in yellow. You're in this business, you want to call the people in blue. They're the rebar contractors. The guy in yellow, they're the steel contractors, precast directors. These guys over here, they do crane erection and stuff. Talk to any one of them. I said, but one caveat. What's that? I says, here's one big employer, and I'd name the company. I say, they friggin' hate me. They hate me, so if you ask them if it's a good idea to work with me, they'll tell you I'm no good. They hate me because I got over the top with them guys when I first started back in 91 and 93. We ended up on strike for about 10 weeks, 7 or 8 weeks, and 2 or 3 weeks. In 91, longer. In 93, there's never been a strike since 93 because I learned by my mistakes.
Were you too aggressive maybe?
Too aggressive.
Yep.
And made it too personal.
And you steamrolled.
Yeah. But now I get along great with the contractor.
Yeah.
Now I get along great.
So what are the things along the way that you remember winning you the most fanfare and losing you fanfare?
Honesty, integrity. Just people have to believe you. You can't lie.
Right.
You know, I'd always tell people, I say, look, I'm never going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
You're listening to the Old Dirty Boston Podcast.